I'm going to provide a response, not an answer.
You may.
I'd appreciate an answer, but if you prefer a response, that's what we're used to here.
One of the areas in which I've done a lot of work is labor management relations. And I know the reason that seniority developed, because you always know when somebody was hired, but we don't have very good ways of distinguishing effectiveness. But my examination of current contracts, not all of them in the state, but current contracts, and my conversations with both teachers and administrators on a variety of studies throughout the district suggests, as the chairman suggested, that seniority is not the criterion for layoffs. I would like to see, I don't think we know in California how many districts use straight seniority, and it would be good to know that. I think my point about evaluation was until we have an effective system that can distinguish well and credibly between high-quality teachers and less high-quality teachers, that it is very difficult to use something that is not objective for layoffs. And principal's judgment sometimes is very good and sometimes is a little shaky. So I think that we are left with a bigger issue. And the bigger issue is thinking about developing a new kind of system based on professional growth that gets people the support and help they need. And I would agree, offs the ones who really are not succeeding in the classroom. And I point you to the peer review programs in Poway and San Juan for those kinds of things.
Okay, thank you for your response. I do think it highlights the importance of moving all of these forward so that we can have robust systems in place where we can make better decisions for our kids and for our teachers. Thank you.
Ms. Kim?
Yes. Thank you. Both Dr. Goldhaber and Dr. Futternick talked about value-added measures. So for some clarification, I'd like to ask a question to Dr. Goldhaber. Is value-added only based upon test scores?
Yeah, value added is based upon test scores.
Okay, I'm not quite sure because to me it sounded like Dr. Fernick was disputing that, or could you?
No, that was my point.
Okay.
That they are only based on test scores, and so just to give you an example, if a teacher spend an inordinate amount of time preparing kids to take tests, which I think if we had children in our class, we would not like that very much. A trained observer would come in and say, gee, you're spending an awful lot of time preparing kids to take tests. Your kids seem to be doing pretty well on the tests, but they're not, there are a lot of things that they're not learning that we would hope they would learn. An observation would pick that up, but just using value-added models wouldn't pick that up.
Dr. Goldhaber, would you like to follow up on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's not clear. It's not clear that even that a teacher who spends a lot of time helping, doing sort of test prep that is perhaps not productive for that student's lifetime would be a high value-added teacher. But I also want to take the opportunity to actually correct, with all due respect, something that Ken, I'm a first name guy, that Ken said. The system in Charlotte-Mecklenburg is not the value-added system that I used in Washington State or that was used in the Susanna Loeb et al. Study. The system in Charlotte-Mecklenburg is a system that relies on multiple criteria, and I don't even know that I don't remember if value add was even one of the criteria, but it definitely was an observation. There was some principal judgment. I think there may have been some student growth. And this is why the Matt Kraft study I think is very important, because it's a concrete alternative that is not just value added. It is a nuanced system, and what he found is that when principals used that system and didn't use a strict seniority criterion for the layoffs, that student achievement was higher than had a strict seniority system been used. It is student achievement on the state test. So one could say, that maybe we don't care so much about the state test. That wouldn't be my position. But it was clear that this nuanced system where, you've got principals making judgments, observations of teacher practice, etc., resulted in better outcomes than just value added. I'll say one other thing about value added. I don't personally think that this is or should be a debate about value added. And I actually said the same thing to the lawyers in the Vergara case. I think that an effective evaluation system differentiates teachers for the reasons that are highlighted, that we want to move the full distribution. And so it differentiates teachers at the bottom, and it differentiates teachers in the middle, and it differentiates teachers at the top. So you can use those evaluations to make informed personnel decisions, and you can help the teachers that need help. The problem with a lot of existing evaluations is, and I would guess this is true in California, that they don't differentiate systems. They don't differentiate the teachers. They suggest that all teachers are equally satisfactory. And if you think about that, it's true that if you have a system that says that, effectively you can't use the performance evaluations to make any personnel decisions. So I do think that it's correct that these things go hand in hand. You need an effective evaluation system in order to inform any kind of high stakes or low stakes personnel decisions.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Futernick, I appreciated your testimony, actually all of it. I do think there is a lot of area of common agreement. One point that you made towards the end of your testimony was that as long as our evaluation system continues broken as it is, and it's not improved to be a better measure of teacher effectiveness, seniority needs to still be considered. But should we get a better evaluation system, you would support moving away from a last in, first out, or LIFO situation. Why is that? Assuming we got it, and we do our work as a legislature, and we improve the evaluation system, what about a seniority-based system do you find problematic from your experience and what you've evaluated?
Well, what's problematic with purely seniority-based system is that you do have situations where a person, third-year teacher, four-year teacher, is really promising and by all valid assessments is doing a terrific job, has great potential, and you have someone, and I would agree with the comments, if you had a 25-year veteran who was ineffective, that person should be given a chance to improve and fired if they don't. But there are some people that don't fall into that category. They're good enough. We wouldn't fire them. They're not unsatisfactory in terms of performance, but they aren't at the level of performance using multiple measures as the four-year teacher. And so in an ideal world, we would say if we have to let someone go, it ought to be the 24-year veteran who's not nearly as high-quality teacher as the four-year. The problem is we don't have good ways of knowing, of being able to tell the difference, as you just mentioned. And if you're in a school, I almost, you responded, maybe I misunderstood what you said, but if you're in a school and you doubt the integrity of the system, that there isn't a system in place. It's like what Thomas Talk found in his analysis of typical teacher evaluations, that they're arbitrary, that they're not based on careful gathering of data, that the observers aren't trained, then it creates this environment where people are anxious and worry about favoritism and arbitrary decisions on very, very high state. You'd be a 24-year veteran teacher, and someone has said, you're going, we're going to keep this other one. And then you have other factors that play into it, which is you might be able to hire 2 4-year teachers for the price of the 24-year-old. So as a principal, I'm thinking, I'd rather keep that person, pay them less, and get rid of the other. And I don't really have any objective reasons to defend my position otherwise. So there's a potential for corruption, and it creates an environment for teachers that makes a lot of people nervous because it seems like the decisions could be arbitrary or based on favoritism, because in fact we don't have good evaluation systems that tell us that the 24-year veteran is not at the same level of quality as the 4-year.
The states where you found better evaluation systems and maybe less of that anxiety, are they also ones that, like California, for example, we have some of the strictest wrongful termination, age discrimination, other basis of preventing an employer from dismissing someone on grounds that we would consider arbitrary harassment. Right. Again, various types of discrimination. They apply everywhere else in the workplace. And so these states, ones that had those protections for the 24-year teacher who is nervous about perhaps age discrimination or other bases of wrongful termination, or did they strictly rely on the protection of seniority?
So, to answer your question, I had another slide. In Montgomery County, they use a blended system. They have a professional growth system for administrators, for teachers, and professional support staff. They have a good evaluation system. Here's what they do about teacher layoffs. Teachers in the first 5 years are laid off in order of licensure category, starting with those who have provisional licenses. Within each type of license, performance is given equal weight with years of experience up until the 6-year mark, and for teachers with 6 or more years of teaching experience is weighed more heavily, and absent a serious performance problem, such a teacher would likely not be laid off. So there is a hybrid system that does weigh performance, and there is evidence, by the way, that various studies that show that outcomes are correlated with experience. It's not very highly correlated, but there is some correlation to it. So you're more likely to get better outcomes with a teacher with more experience. There are certainly exceptions, like the ones I just mentioned, and we have all probably seen them. But unless you have a system like they do in Montgomery County that can really make those distinctions validly and reliably, then you're creating you have the potential for bad things to happen and to create an environment where there's a sense of unfairness and arbitrariness.
Dr. Goldhaber, did you have a follow-up?
Quickly, please.
I just saw your head nod. I didn't know if that was an area you agree with. I think it was the commentary that the correlations between how long, longevity someone's been teaching and effectiveness.
Yeah, I think there's good evidence that early on in a teacher's career, there's generally speaking, a return to having more teaching experience. But I would echo what Ken said, which is to say that that correlation by no means means that the third-year teacher is always better than the first-year teacher, the fifth-year teacher is always better than the third-year teachers. There's plenty of overlap in those performance distributions, and I think that we probably should use that information about your actual practice, your actual performance in making decisions, as opposed to simply relying on the idea that the experience is always going to tell you what is the answer.
Right.
Thank you.
We agree,
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Weber.
Yes, let me see if I understand exactly what is being stated. And these are issues that most of us have worked on for many years, and very familiar with Boston and the folks in Boston and what they do through a number of friends of mine who work there. But it seems as if the real key issue, and I'd hate to develop any system that was based strictly on the possibility of layoffs. I mean, I think that in itself is going to skew any system that comes into play, because everybody's going to think about their job, versus a system that, because I think if we have an adequate evaluation system that does what you talk about, which is true, which is move the bell curve to a different level, then it won't really matter a whole lot at that point, because in the current system we have for layoffs would probably work fairly well, in other words, because everybody's going to be effective at a high level of performance, because they're going to get the kind of ongoing evaluation and ongoing support that is so essential to really building a workforce in the state. And I guess our issue here is that obviously we have a system, we don't have much of a system that moves us in that direction, where there is ongoing evaluation, where there are multiple measures to look at how effective a person is in a classroom and the impact they have on the lives of students, not only in value added, but other kinds of things that work in terms of whether it's portfolios or whether it's achievement of specific goals that have been set and so forth and so on. So we, as a state, seem somewhat bankrupt when it comes to evaluation. We have an effective, ineffective system that only happens the first 18 months. Occasionally, it comes back in another form if there's some punitive things that happen. If folks are really, really bad, then you can put them in another mode for evaluation. But evaluation itself is not an ongoing part of the system that talks about assistance for teachers and producing the strongest workforce. So that it's not seen, so it's currently seen as a punitive thing, much more than a staff development and training thing. Whether it happens every year, which is probably is entirely too much. Having been a university administrator, that's entirely too much. But you have to do it the first couple of years in order to know what your workforce is like. But then you should be able to do it in chunks of years, whether it's 3 years or 4 years or whatever, because it does give you an opportunity to see what progress a person has made, because most people don't make progress every year. They're in process of making progress, but they don't make progress every year, generally speaking. So it gives you an opportunity to really look at a chunk of time to say, here were some goals that you've set for yourself, or we've set for you in terms of student performance, your performance, whatever. And over 3 years, this is what you've done. And it gives a much more comprehensive evaluation of the person's performance. So we don't have that now. Poway, I know, is doing some interesting thing, and it's in the county of San Diego that I represent. But Poway is not an inner city school district, and so it has its limitations in the fact that there's a lot of homogeneity in Poway in terms of the families and the teaching force and all that other stuff. So while I look at Poway and I've seen the stuff they've done, looked at their material, they're limited in the ability to apply it or to even to get buy-in because you have such a difference between Poway and San Diego Unified in terms of students, teachers, populations, all kinds of things. And so it becomes one of those districts that's difficult to take what they've done and translate it into another district. There are parts and pieces that you can. So with that in mind, I mean, just trying to grapple with this enormous thing as the state of California. You know, and having authored one of the bills to deal with evaluation and provide the multiple pieces and so forth and so on, I'm not sure where we start in California because there's such a resistance. Most of you spoke, I guess you testified at Vergara. I'm not sure whose side you were on. Who were you testifying? I should ask, what part did you win or did you lose? You know, in terms of your performance or in terms of your testimony that's there. But clearly, I think what's happening in California, at least that I find somewhat alarming, is that it appears on the surface that the only way we address issues is through litigation. And to me, that's the wrong way to address the issues of California, whether it's the Williams case, the Vergara case, and it goes on and on and on, that the issues that we seem not to be able to come together to wrestle with the critical issues at any other level other than litigation. And then that doesn't get us very far because we're still trying to figure out how to implement Williams and how to implement this one and that one. And so it goes around and around in circles, and yet the issues are still there, particularly in the inner city schools, in Los Angeles, San Diego, Bay Area, all around, with regards to what we're going to do about, in my mind, not worrying about layoff and all that stuff, but really, because, I mean, if we got teacher shortage, not a whole lot of layoffs are going to occur. But really, how do we create a stronger teaching force that is supportive of the new teachers we get, supportive of the current ones we have, to move that bell curve so that we're really dealing with a highly effective population of teachers who can get the job done. And while we may grapple with what's effective, ineffective teachers, those kinds of things, most parents don't grapple with that. And you probably didn't either, and I didn't as a parent. You knew right away, sometimes after a couple of weeks, who was going to do it and who was not. And those kinds of things occur in the classroom just from parents' perspectives. But you know, what do you see as the best approach to it? And where were you guys on Vergara? I'm kind of interested to see whether or not they paid any attention. You were on the losing side, and you were on the
Vergara side of the Vergara.
Okay, you on Vergara side. Okay, good. Okay, but you know, just so you had the different points of view. But I mean, what do you see as a current system? I found the tenure system in public schools when I was president of the school board to be extremely ineffective and frustrating, because I had no way of helping struggling teachers. You know, by the time we figured that the teacher was ineffective in the minds of the principal, they were on their way out the door in 18 months. And there was no flexibility that says, wait a minute, I can give you another year or 2 years, and I could work with you. Because we lost some good people, I believe, because we didn't have a system that could help. And to me, that was the most frustrating thing, much more than whether it's 2 years. I mean, I think a year and a half is too much. I mean, it's too short a time frame. But, you know, the whole idea of of support was not possible in a year and a half. It just wasn't possible to really determine who was going to be a good teacher and this was the career they should be in and who was not.
So I want to say that this is my opinion as opposed to, there's a little bit of research that I'll tell you about, but opinion. I think that you can take, I don't know the California evaluation system well enough to say it is successful or it is failing, right? But I do think, and I say this mainly as a former school board member, that I think there's a fair bit of evaluation that goes on in schools, but it goes on under the radar, and that part of the problem is that there aren't stakes that are attached to the evaluations. There may be nominally stakes that are attached to evaluations, but one of the issues in the Vergara trial was how expensive is it to fire a teacher, right? So are there really stakes, or are there not? Because you don't actually go through or not many people actually go through the process. So, if you believe that there are not stakes attached to an evaluation, a savvy principal should not allocate much time doing good evaluations, right? Because there are many things that principals are called upon to do, and if the evaluation looks like it is irrelevant given the political, legal conditions that you're operating under, then you probably ought to allocate your time to doing other things and possibly conduct the evaluation, but do it in a subtle way that never leaves a track record. So, teachers, before they are tenured, lots of them churn from school to school. My personal experience is that what's happening is that savvy principals are in fact evaluating their teachers. They are deciding there are some teachers that they don't want in their school building, that it's costly politically, in terms of management, time, etc., to give someone a bad evaluation. So the more expedient thing, and probably the smarter thing to do in terms of improving your own school, is say to teachers, look, things are not working out this year. I don't want to give you a bad evaluation. If you can find another job, then you'll get a good evaluation and you can go to the other job. You're not in my building. And we can see that empirically. We can see that teachers at the bottom of the distribution tend to move around a lot from schools to school to school. Oftentimes they end up in the schools that are serving the more disadvantaged students because those are the schools that have a harder time attracting teachers. So that was the part that was a little bit more my conjecture. I do want to say something specifically about research. There's another study by Susanna Loeb, Jim Wyckoff, they do very good work, that looks at New York City. New York City changed their policy several years back on tenure. They still tenure teachers, but you can decide whether to tenure or give the teacher a sort of a continuation to the next year where you don't actually grant tenure. And they've looked at the teachers that get continued from year to year because perhaps they need more information about the teacher versus the teachers that get tenured at sort of the regular tenure deadline. And there are dramatic differences between in the quality of those different teachers based on value added and based on more nuanced sort of holistic assessments of teacher effectiveness. And so I do think that there are alternatives, but I guess where I would start is that if there's no connection between policy and evaluation, it's not clear to me that you would necessarily get rigorous evaluations.
Thank you. Any further comments? Seeing none, thank you for your presentations. Excellent job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good information there, too, especially on the Massachusetts example. That was interesting. With that, we're going to turn our eye to practitioner perspectives. That's people who really do this. And we'll bring forward Shannon Brown, she's a teacher, and Rick Messer, an administrator from San Juan Unified School District. And we'll also bring forward Jennifer Thomas, who is a teacher, and Stephen McMahon, who is an administrator in San Jose Unified School District. If you all four could come forward, thank you for presenting to us today. Appreciate your time and your information. And these are people who, again, who do this. This is where the rubber meets the road. We're not just talking about it. These people do it. So thank you. I believe Shannon Brown and Rick Messer were going to present first.
So good afternoon. I am currently the president of the San Juan Teachers Association and a teacher in San Juan, but I do feel compelled to share, since so many people made a big deal about quality teachers and the significance of it, that I am a California Teacher of the Year 2011. So if we are going to talk about who knows about instruction, then Jennifer and I are happy to weigh in on that as we go along. So we want to talk to you a little bit about why we started designing a new evaluation system. And the researchers earlier shared a lot of these points, but we want to share from the practitioner perspective what's going on. So our current system was seen as largely ineffective by both teachers and administrators in our district. We did an internal survey, and it actually confirmed that belief. Remarkably, the feedback from administrators and teachers was very consistent, that administrators did not feel like they had sufficient training to do an effective job in their role, and that they had too many people to evaluate year to year, so they didn't have time to do it effectively. From the teacher perspective, there was no quality feedback given, and they wanted that. That was something that they desperately did want. There was a lack of consistency, again, as mentioned earlier, because it depends on who your administrator is and what their prior knowledge or training or skill set is. So that bred a lot of mistrust in the system. And for people who year after year after year were meeting standards, the process was deemed to be largely perfunctory and compliance-based and did little to nothing to inform them of their practice. And as we have been sharing our work around the state, we hear this from a lot of other districts, that this is not unique to San Juan. So when we got together, the district and the association, to redesign our system, we looked at what we already know we're doing well. And as Julie Kopic mentioned earlier, we have a very high-quality PAR program that has been research-based, as well as we think it's effective. And we have a high-quality induction program. And as you know, since you're the education committee, you know induction supports first and second-year teachers. And one of the similarities that we think is so important about the quality of both of these programs is that the focus is on improving practice based on evidence of student learning and how students are progressing in the classroom. So what we agreed to is that in the redesign of our system, we would want to create a system that improved for everybody, that we did have differentiation based on the skill set of the people that were in the process, and that's what our goal is. So we used research and sound learning theory as the underpinnings to develop our system. And I do want to just note quickly, because there are some people out there that think that because of certain positions you have or hold, that you already are predisposed to certain beliefs. And what I want to say very clearly as co-director of our PAR panel along with Rick Messer is that not everyone can be a teacher, and it is insulting, in fact, to think so, because the work is incredibly complex and difficult. But our first response for even people who are deemed to be struggling should be support, and Rick will talk about our PAR program, but that should be our first response, is to support people, and only after receiving that support and they are unable or unwilling to meet standards they should be recommended for dismissal, and we will go through the details of our process of that.
So good afternoon. I'm an assistant superintendent of secondary education. I'm a former high school principal and a social studies teacher. So going through this experience from many different lenses has given me a lot of opportunity as we moved into this process to have an understanding from the different seats that all of our stakeholders are in. So as we move into this process, we're moving from evaluation to growth, a shift in mindset that our system and most of our evaluation systems are set on. It's really about a process now of looking at what we do to promote the learners in the room, which are our teachers. We call our practitioners now, versus a different model which we dropped in. Amongst our shifts, we want to look at the multiple measures of evidence around student learning, to the point where we understand that it's not just based on that observational evidence, that one formal observation that we walk in and see, because we know on any given day a lesson can go bad, but it's the skill of the practitioner, of that teacher, and what they do in that situation is what counts. And so it's if the teacher, as long as the teacher understands what is going on and can make the changes and knows how to adjust. That is the practice. So it's not that one shot. So in our system, as we move forward, we're really shifting our roles. We want to look at the multiple measures, and we want to shift that role of the administrator to that of a facilitator. Because within this model we're developing, our system of professional growth is to also bring in peer facilitators, teachers, very successful teachers, hopefully, in the practice of teaching that will also participate in this process. And so we've had some very strong models of this using our induction program. We have consulting teachers that as a district we pay for that serve our first and second year teachers, as well as serve as our peer assistance and review consulting teachers. They're highly trained. They regularly reflect on their work. They meet regularly, and they present to us on a regular basis. So understanding that we have an element of a workforce that can really support each other, we felt it's a very important piece to our system. So the role of facilitator now supports reflection based on evidence. It's moving from where the administrator does all the talking to doing all the listening. The facilitator should start listening and start allowing for the practitioner, that teacher, to start reflecting on the process of the evaluation. Now, in this process, our goal is to move to 2 to 3 formal observations. And as was said earlier, there's a lot of time and effort put into that. But we also want to allow for videotaping of classes and other opportunities to provide different types of evidence within this process. And a second part to this process is called reflective conversations, where it's not about the practitioner and the facilitator or administrator sitting down and talking about what they saw in an observation, but having a reflective conversation about what's been going on throughout the term, talking about different types of evidence and measuring growth going along with a project-based curriculum that they were doing or something to that effect, so that there's ongoing conversation throughout the year. And in a year-long process, this would allow for to see growth occur. Also in our process, we've created we're using rubrics to help us in making these decisions. Now, following the California standards for the teaching profession, the 6 standards make up, 38, 40 different elements. Based on the work from the New Teacher Center, our goal is to reduce down to 9 essential elements of the CSTPs, with a goal that we really focus and train and prepare the practitioners and the facilitators in this process. There has to be training in this, and I think it's a key element that we didn't mention. Not only do we need to train our facilitators on a regular basis, those who are going to go into the process of going through the system of professional growth also need to be trained so that they also have the same understanding of what the process will have and its detail. So if you take a look, this is just one example of what our rubric looks like that we're developing, and it's in progress. You notice the categories: not meeting standard, developing, and meeting standards. And so the not meeting standards, clearly what we try to do is spell out what specifically would not meet standards based on the evidence that was collected. The next column is developing, and this is where we feel that the practitioner, the teacher, if they're new teachers, they're going to be starting in this category. And they may be in developing for 1 to 3 or 4 years, and we understand that. I think as they continue to grow, we expect to see movement and expect them to move into the meeting standards as they move on, and our goal is going to be to help them do that. But for our veteran teachers, they could start in developing at the beginning of the year because they're going to choose. They're going to set themselves on the rubric at the beginning as we start this process. But our goal is if they're starting in developing, they have to move over to meeting. And notice in meeting standards, we did not identify different categories of what meeting standards would be. And one of the main reasons for that is we would lose focus. We thought that once you identify if it said meets better, and meets great, then everybody's going to want to focus on what that means versus focusing on what the growth is. Once you're meeting standards, that's fantastic. Okay, let's the next step of growth. Again, not the gotcha, but the growth in this process.